Welcome, everyone. Good boy, Tucker. This is learning at its most fun.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another Thursday webinar. Today, we have our part 2 of the prospecting series. So last week, we actually covered all of those kind of statuses, getting those contact foundations in here. This week, however, we're going to join me. My name's Catherine. We're going to go through really the part 2 of processes. So again, last week was part 1. We covered all of those contact-based foundations. This week, we're going to kind of add on that Lego piece and talk about what other tools you can use within the CRM. Now, again, as mentioned, we do have this recorded. We're going to post it on our help desk because I know if you're like me, I like to look back and see how I can get everything up and running. But again, we're going to take a deep, deep dive into those different processes. Now, chances are high you're going to hear me say that word at least 500 times. I will repeat that over and over and over again. And anyone who's hopped on a webinar with us before knows that when we say process, we're talking workflows. So when it comes to prospecting, one of the biggest tools that we find is incredibly useful with prospecting particularly is that workflow concept. Now, again, workflows are your process. Another way to look at them is like a checklist. Now, I know if you're like me, if you're blind, these glasses only work so far type of thing, we're going to zoom in on this workflow in particular, really take it apart so that way we know all of these moving pieces. But this is one that's a very, very useful tool when it comes to, again, that prospecting call cadence. So I'm going to kind of hop back and forth between this workflow as well as going into our database. Now, I do want to give one little warning. I'm not going to build this one from complete scratch, but I will give a little kind of bonus benefit, I guess I should say, a positive outlook for you at the end of the webinar here. So again, what we're really looking at with this workflow, again, is that call cadence. I have a prospect. What am I going to do with it? I have a name. This is that part 2 of it. So I'm going to reach out to them. Well, this is where these different scenarios can come into play. So if we're looking at here with this interaction 1, actually, you know what? I'm going to toggle over and I'm going to come to our help desk just so I can zoom in a little bit better. See if I can get them a little larger. Sometimes that helps. There we go. Okay. So again, this is that same workflow we were just looking at within that slideshow, but this is really where it's going to take, again, those different directions that we may have. So interaction number 1, all that's really saying here is that I made an initial attempt to reach this potential prospect that we have. Now, if you refer to them as leads and that's how you like it, again, it's perfectly fine, kind of a apples to orange scenario. But again, interaction number 1 is really quite basic. I'm making a phone call. I'm sending those emails. That is my very, very, again, common just task that I'm going to set myself up with here. So I've got this first step, 2 basic tasks. This is where it can get a little tricky with workflows because this is where we have the what if scenarios. Well, what if I did successfully get a hold of them and they told me they're interested? Well, if they told me they're interested, I'm not going to reach out 3 days later and go, hey, are you still interested? Did you change your mind in the last couple of days? No, I'm going to push that process forward. So again, that's the most positive outcome. Outcome 1, I successfully get a hold of them. They tell me, yes, that sounds like something I need. And we can go ahead and actually bypass every single one of these steps here and come to the very end of this workflow with the interested in meeting, update that category, and schedule the discovery meeting. So again, this is coming into play, and I'm going to come back to my PowerPoint here. This is coming back to this whole concept here is I'm taking that prospect, or again, lead, if you have it that way, taking that prospect and lead through that scenario of if I get a hold of them, I'm moving forward, ultimately hoping they will become a client. Now, that's again my best case scenario. It's not the only scenario. That's not life. Another scenario could be I could give them a call, I could send that email, and I just haven't heard from them. And I want to follow up with them. That's where I could have a second outcome that's pushing me to interaction number 2 or step 2 here. So again, first outcome takes me from step 1 all the way to step 6. Second outcome takes me from step 1 to step 2, where again, I'm making that secondary attempt. Now, again, still sticking with number 1 here, The absolute worst case scenario. I do get a hold of them, but they say, no, thanks. I'm not interested. Well, again, this is one of those, we don't really want to badger them at this point. We don't want to go, hey, have you changed your mind in 3 days? Have you changed your mind in 7 days? We don't want to be that person. This is where we can come from step 1 and again, bypass 2, 3, 4, and come to a not interested step. So again, this is really just taking us through those different scenarios. One option takes us here, second option takes us there, third option takes us there. And you're going to find we do a lot of wash, rinse, repeat. Interaction 2, same scenarios could happen. I can get a hold of them. They tell me they're interested. I can get a hold of them. They tell me they're not interested. I don't get a hold of them. I'm making another attempt again a couple days later. We're going to do that same exact mentality one more time with interaction number 3. Again, interested, not interested, or completed. Let's give it another shot. This is where we finally make that little change. If we get to step 4 here, and we've tried several times over the course of 12 days to really reach out to them. And again, that's just the regular dates we set in here. You can have a different process. That's perfectly fine. But at this point, that's when we're saying, all right, we've made our due diligence. We've tried. At this point, we've got to just move forward. That's where we can either say, hey, if they did not, again, reach out, that's where we're just saying not interested. Or, hey, we did successfully, again, get a hold of them. Took 4 different attempts, but we got a hold of them, or they're interested. So again, with this one, there's a lot of different arrows pointing in different directions because it, again, could differ every single time you have a different prospect. Now, the best or biggest thing, however you want to kind of think about, is that this is taking you through that process. So that way, everyone in your office, or more importantly, you know exactly where you're at with that particular prospect. So let's come on over and actually really show this in the CRM. So again, when it comes to workflows, we do want to actually start with our name in the top right-hand corner and come to manage your account. Again, workflows is that process and they are repeatable. We want to be able to reuse it over and over and over again. That's where when we come up to our name and that manage your account, we have the ability to create that workflow template for us to reuse it over and over and over again. Now, when I click into mine, I do have a bunch in here. And again, I'll circle back to why this could be a really good thing in just a couple of minutes. But at the top, I just put a little asterisk with mine just so that way it regroups it towards the top. Kind of think of it as I put my own order to this. Now, when I click into this, I'm going to let this load here for a second, but you're going to see it's going to look very similar to what we have over here. Now, again, I'm going to zoom out here just so we have that big picture of everything. The one thing I want to clarify with the whole workflow process, I know it's going to sound weird, but do not start to build the workflow in the CRM. That's actually not your first step when it comes to workflows. There should be a rough draft phase known as the whiteboarding phase. That's really what a whiteboarding will get you to with this one, is that it's hashing out all those ideas that you have up here, but it's putting it into place so that way when you have something like this, it's a lot of just copy and paste, fill it in, and get the moving parts actually in concrete order. So again, I look at whiteboarding as kind of that rough draft. Once you actually build it in here, this is that final draft. I'm ready to actually, release it to the world type of thing. So again, I'm just going to minimize it just a little bit here so you could see again a little deja vu. There's that interaction number 1, that first task to make that phone call, second task to send that email. Again, interaction number 2. And again, that's where we're having those steps and tasks. Now, again, those were the 2 big aspects that I just covered when it came to the actual workflow. The other third major discussion that I just had there was the outcome concept. Those are 3 of the biggest moving pieces when it comes to workflows. The 4th, which I did gloss over a little bit, and I want to hone in onto that now, is this concept of target dates. Your target date is supposed to guide you through that process. If I have a prospect that I want to reach out to, I don't want to sit on that. I don't want to wait 3 months and go, today's the day. I'm going to reach out to them. No, I want to reach out as soon as possible. That's where I set this on target date to on target date. I want to reach out ASAP. That's what this is really saying here. Now with interaction 2, if you remember from over here, we had a couple days later. That was the decision that we made. You could have this 1 week later. You could have it a day later. That's again going to be up to you. But no matter what, that second attempt that I have is going to have it where it's after the target date. And again, however many days or weeks you want to reach out to. Probably wouldn't do weeks, that's a bit insane, but I would definitely have it where it's a couple days after. Now, again, you're going to keep that mentality though. Same concept. If I'm reaching out for a third time, that's again a couple more days later. Big clarification here. I know when we see this, we're thinking it's a couple days after the previous step. That's not what that's looking at here. What it's saying here is after target date is 7 days. That means it's 7 days from, let me come all the way back up here, this original date here. So if I wanted this to actually be 7 days from this date, I would have wanted to put 10 days under this third step. So again, when you see this where it's how many days after, it's from whatever that initial on target date is. So again, my initial date's that very, very beginning. That could be today, that could be tomorrow, again, depending on when we take it live. But that's what we're talking about with that after target date concept. So again, when it comes to it, macro view out or big picture out with workflows, there's 4 pieces that make it up. Steps, you'll find right here. Tasks, you'll find right down here. Third is that target date. And fourth, again, are those outcomes. Now, I do want to clarify something again further. With outcomes, technically they are not required. With something like this one, I do feel that it is incredibly necessary because again, there are those different possibilities. If you live in a world where every time you reach out to them, it's always 100% success, please share. I would love to go and work for that kind of environment. But again, that's not normal. Normal is those different possibilities that we have. So that's again where it's just keeping that in mind. And it really is as simple as adding that outcome. Now, again, I know this is a lot to absorb. We do have this exact example on our help desk. So when in doubt, if you're sitting here going, oh, okay, I have no idea where we go, I want to copy this one exactly, you can find that on our help desk just by going to that question mark in the top right-hand corner. But there is something else that I do want to clarify with this, and it's all the way at the bottom. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. There are 2 steps down here, the not interested and the interested step. Neither one of these have target dates associated with them or step due dates associated with it. And that's because, again, it could happen at any point in time. I could reach out at 1 and go all the way down here. I could be at 3 and go all the way down here. I could be at 4. Again, you get where I'm going with that. So this is where, again, that step due date, you can leave it blank and it's perfectly fine. They are not technically required. And for something like this that is extremely variable, it actually makes sense to leave this blank. One thing you do not want to do, though, is to avoid outcomes. You need an outcome on something like this one, because if I did not have an outcome for this step 5, not interested, what that would have done is send me to step 6 that says they are interested. So imagine looking as a new person in your workflow, you see that the interaction 1 was completed, they skipped these steps, went to not interested, and then all of a sudden you're seeing interested. It doesn't make sense, right? That's probably not a scenario that you'll have too often, if ever. So this is where you're going to have that, again, that step to just complete, or that outcome to just complete that step. So keep that in mind. Target date and step due date, or however you want to kind of look at that, not necessarily required for a step like this one, but an outcome extremely valuable so you can complete that workflow at that particular step. Now, the biggest thing I want to take away with this one, though, is that at the end of it, it really is a very basic workflow to use, because all it's really telling us is to communicate with this prospect. Now, this is just one example of a workflow. If you wanted a prospect scenario that happened to deal with more of like a meeting, I know some of us phrase it as like a discovery meeting or an initial contact meeting, however you want to phrase it. But if you wanted a workflow that dealt more around the actual initial meeting, that's perfectly fine. And in fact, we thought the same thing. That's where this whole concept at the very, very last interested in here comes with scheduling a meeting. That's where that comes in. So you can have a different workflow for that different process. But again, this is just taking us through the very basic initial step of prospecting. All right, so again, that's the concept of really working through something like this workflow, taking us through a process. I do want to hop over to the left side of the screen though and talk about one more field just because it can come as a little bit of a shocker or confusion. And I want to clear that up right now. So I'm going to click edit really fast and you're going to see a couple more fields over here on the left. Now this right here, I will just say it right now. This is the problem child. I know every time I ever get a workflow call where they're like, gathering's not working, it's broken, I can't figure out what's going on. It's because we'll come in here and we'll see this, and then we'll see this, and we'll go back and forth, and our brain's just like, what? So what this is really saying here, if I put a value in this set target date, what that's saying is however many days I put in here after creation, it's filling in with that date. Now for this one, again, I'm not sitting on this process. I want to reach out as soon as I physically can. I'm going to put 0 days here because when I go to launch this workflow, it is now going to fill this in right here with today's date. That's what that's stressing. If I put 2 days here, this would fill in 2 days from now. Now that's a Saturday. So that's where this comes into play, where it'll actually push that task forward to a Friday, or if we have it where there's like a federal holiday, so think something like a Labor Day might be on a Monday, it could push it to that Tuesday. So that I would highly encourage. If you're going to fill this information in, check this off by default. Hopefully none of us are working Saturday, Sundays, or federal holidays, and let's just keep that in mind so we don't let anything slip through the cracks. But again, that's what that is. And I would encourage having, if you're going to do a workflow just like this one, having this fill in with that 0 days. Now I'm going to save this workflow just in case, again, made any changes. Let's save that in there. And again, to actually use this workflow, how do we actually launch that? Now, before I do that, keep in mind, again, just as a little minor recap, workflows show up in several locations. That's intentional because we don't want you to ignore them. If there's a task that's due today, you're going to see it right down here. If it's a task that's assigned to you and maybe you got a little crazy, you just had one of those days that did not go to plan at all and you're behind, that's okay. That's life. I get it. Come on over here. Look for that kind of like Uno reverse card. You'll see that 33, for me at least, 33 active workflows. This is my laundry list of everything that I have outstanding. I'm a big fan of sorting by task due date, just so that way I can work in any order, but more particularly, I can get the old things done first before I go and work on something that's not due for another couple months. Now, again, I'm just going to come back to the today page, kind of acting in like I just came in, I've got that workflow. How would I even go about this? So if I come on up to that trusty little plus sign at the top, that's your quick add button. If you come up here, workflows is actually right at the bottom of that list. So when I come in here, I want to pick that template that I had. Again, make sure you build out that workflow first. Otherwise, this is kind of irrelevant, but make sure you build that in and then you have it set to active. That's what allows you to pick it and launch from there. So again, I pick my prospecting workflow, fills in with any details that I have. I would definitely want to link it to a prospect that I have associated. So if I came in here and went, okay, I want to go ahead and attach it to, I'm going to look for Jane. I can have Jane in there, or again, anyone I'm looking for. The big thing I want you to focus in on though, this target date. So again, remember when I put that 0 days, it's going to fill in with whatever date I had here. That's why I'm seeing today's date in here. Now, if you realize you put the wrong person, again, keep in mind, you could always attach it here. I'm actually going to show you one other thing as well, just because, again, this is a scenario that could come up about. If you haven't quite yet added in that prospect, but you know you want to go in there because maybe you're double checking some spelling, you could still create, I'm actually do the create and edit just so it immediately brings me to that page. You can still launch that workflow even if there's not a contact attached. I would always recommend though, because again, this is dealing with an actual contact, come back in here, click that little, actually maybe do that a little fast, come up to the top, you're going to see that little dash. I know it's tiny. Click on that here. This is where you can link them after the fact. So if I came in here, I want to say I have Poe. I know he's my prospect. I can link that contact. There he is there. Now that's linked after the fact. So again, I want to just point that out because I know that's something that sometimes we get hung up on. I want to launch this, but I haven't quite done it yet. I get it. Again, I know it's not a process that I'd encourage, but I also get it. Sometimes our brains work differently. Now from here though, if you see again, there's that target date, there's that due date that filled in, and it's going to go accordingly. There's that couple of days after, couple days after that, couple days after that. Again, there's the process. This is the easy part. Easy part, we're working through it. So if I come in here and go, oh, you know what, this is assigned to someone who, they're not in, I got to reassign that. Again, I can still edit this workflow. I may have started with a template, but it doesn't mean I'm glued to this template. There are going to be some variances. Trust me, I love trying to have everyone fit into the same small round peg. It doesn't always happen. So again, this is where you can always come in here. You can reassign who's doing the task. You can come in here and say, we got to do more tasks in here and add more. You can add different outcomes. So maybe they gave you an outcome you never thought would happen, and it happened. You can add an outcome. Again, start with a template that's going to help you, I would say 99.9% of the time. But for those prospects and in other scenarios, those clients, you can still modify it for it to fit the needs. Now, again, this is where I'm literally circling back. This is the easy part. Like I said, now we're completing those tasks. If I made that phone call, I'm hitting complete. If I sent that email, or I have Rebecca send that email, hit complete. Again, you're just marking it as finished when you're done with it. Now, when you're actually hitting that complete, this is where those outcomes come into play. You'll get this pop-up saying, well, where am I going? Did we make the call and send the email and wasn't successful? We didn't get a hold of them. Okay, then I'm going interaction number 2. Did I get a hold of them? And this is the best case scenario. I'm successfully interested type of scenario. Do we go that route? Great, we click this. So again, we're just picking where we need to go. Now, I am going to go positive. I'm going to say we got a hold of them. One other benefit that you get from outcomes is the step notes. Now, with step notes, these live within the workflow. They are not regular notes on the contact record. They live within the workflow. So think of these almost like breadcrumbs. You're just adding details along the way. So I can just say in here, called Poe, and he was immediately interested. Complete my step. Now, 2 things again are going to happen. 1, it's going to actually add in that step note with what I just put in there. And it's going to look, this is where it gets confusing. It's going to look similar to a regular note where date, time, and user stamps it. So again, if anyone else hopped in here, they can go, oh, okay, this is one of those good days. Got it. But the other thing that happened is we bypassed all of those other steps to open up the bottom step here. Now, again, this is where I'd actually want to work through the process again, update that contact status, schedule that onboarding meeting. Now, for the sake of this training, I'm going to go ahead and complete these to make it look like we actually did it here so you can see what that looks like. So if I completed both of these tasks, I can hit each individually, or I can complete the step, either or will mark them all complete. And from here, this is where it's going to say mark as finished, complete my step. And I'm going to have everything all nice and wrapped up. And if I look up here, I've got 100% complete. The other thing that happens, you'll see skip by outcome for any step that you did not go to. So again, this is how that actual process works with that initial call cadence. Now, I want to circle back to something here. If you have one of those where it's like, I want boom, 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 boom type of thing to happen. If I add a prospect into my database, I want this workflow to launch. That's possible. So let's go ahead, let's kind of push forward here. That is what we call an automation. So an automation is kind of if something happens over here, something happens in exchange over here. Kind of consider it like a magic trick. This is when, if I add a contact, it can launch this workflow to start. So if I came in here and I added again, I can say myself, I added myself in here, I can launch that workflow. We just need to get this automation up and running. Now let's hop back into the database and let's show how you can actually do it. Now I'll let you in right now. Automations are far easier to build than workflows. There are less moving parts, so it's obviously gonna be a lot faster. But at first, it's gonna be deja vu. Start by coming up to your name, come to manage your account. And then once you're here, come on over to manage templates. You're gonna come to automation templates. So again, your name, manage your account, and come on over to automation templates. Now, again, from here, if you have nothing in here, do not panic. That's actually probably a good thing. You have a nice clean slate. But in here, we're building out that whole if then. Now, again, I already have this built, but I'm going to go in here and I'm going to walk us through that process. I'm just not going to save it so I don't have duplicates launching, but I'm going to come on over and hit that add button in the top right-hand corner. Now from here, I can just come in here and say prospecting workflow. Now, again, my trigger event, when I look at this, it is me adding in that contact. So if I do that contact added, that's my if I do something. Well, what do I want in exchange? That's where I hit this do this action tab at the top. So if I come over here and say, well, I want that prospecting workflow that I just built out to be launched, I can pick that workflow and pick that prospecting. Now I'm going to pause here for a second, because this is where most of us will see that green button in the bottom corner and immediately have it where green means go, and we'll start to go for this. Stop, give yourself a break, because what this is saying is any contact that you added would trigger this workflow. I doubt you are only adding prospects into your database. You may be adding in, maybe you're even a newer user and you're still adding in clients into your database right now. That might not be a great thing to have prospecting if they're already a client. Maybe you have center of influences in here, or power of attorneys in here, or CPAs, or again, any other relationship that's outside of that contact of prospect and client. That is, again, 100% accurate. I've seen that. It's very, very common. So again, we want to have conditions in play. So again, when I come over here, we've done the first two part. The trigger events that contact added, the action is linking that workflow. This is where the condition comes in, where it's saying, hey, only do this, only work when it is equal to a prospect. So again, I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to hit the if all conditions. Now, again, I know there's two tabs. For this one, we want the if all because we want it to be extremely specific. If we had one of those scenarios where we use lead and prospect interchangeably, I would definitely take a step back and I would come to an agreement overall. But again, just for the argument's sake here, if you did use lead and prospect interchangeably and either one of those could launch this workflow, that's where you would use the if any. But again, for this one, we want to say that only when they are equal to a prospect. So I'm going to come on over to the right, use that new condition, come on in here, contact status equal to, come on over here, find my prospect as that status and add condition. Now, I personally just like to go back and read this as a sentence saying that if I want this prospecting automation to work, it's based off of a contact getting added to launch that workflow specifically when I add that status of prospect. Now, again, from there, that's when I would create that automation. Now, again, I'm not going to do that here just because I know I was taking a quick, oh, that wasn't English. I was taking a quick peek at what I had in here and we already have that established in. So if I had come in here, I would have had another of the same exact thing. Try to avoid that. Automations and actually templates in general are database wide. So you really should only have to have that one when it comes to a prospecting added will launch a workflow specifically in the condition, just like how we described it here. It's the exact same thing, so we wouldn't have needed to rebuild it. So again, that's an automation though. Very simple, straightforward in terms of easy to use versus those workflows. Workflows, again, have those different aspects to it, the different checklists you got to build out for it, the different pieces, who's doing what. Automations really are just I add a contact, I want my workflow when it's a status of prospect. That's it. Very, very basic again in this concept. Now, again, that's how that would work. Everything going forward then would go ahead and launch that, meaning literally any prospect that I came in here and added, I can go ahead and do that. So if I came up here, come up to the little quick add, come to contact, again, big thing to check, make sure that's active. But if I came to contact, I can actually go ahead and do that. So if I came in here and went, okay, you know what? I know for a fact that I am not in here. I'm going to put me in as this way. I'm going to make this super simple. I'm going to bypass all of the details because again, I only have one condition that needs to be met. And I'm going to come all the way down. The one status was what was required. This is where I'm picking that prospect. Again, I'm not worried about anything else right now. Maybe I've got literally only their name. I have their phone number somewhere on my desk type of thing. Status is that prospect. I can come in here, save that contact, let it save into your database. And as you can see over here, I've got some workflows. Now, again, I know I saw 2 prospecting automations and it's actually doing 2 different things here. So that's another thing I wanted to point out. You can have multiple automations with the same trigger event do different things. These are 2 separate workflows. This one's taking me through the call cadence, seeing if they're actually interested. If they are, this is me gathering that information, putting in email addresses, phone numbers, things like that. So that's where this is coming in. Again, it's putting that data in, immediately launching it, and immediately taking me through that process. So that's workflows and automations. Now there's one more tool though, when it comes to prospecting that can be very, very straightforward, not as complex, but again, can help you at least track those different, where am I at, who's doing what type of thing. And that's actually going to be on the left-hand side and come to opportunities. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to let it load. But with opportunities, think sales pipeline. So again, opportunities on the left, you're going to go to the polar opposite side. You're going to go ahead and click on new opportunity on the far right. Now, when you first click this, very basic. All it's saying is, what is that opportunity? And then the type. So if I come in here and say, you know what, there's a rollover. Now from here, that type, you have 2 choices. This is not customizable, but it really wouldn't make sense even if you could. New business is exactly how it sounds. This is associated with a prospect whom you've never worked with before. Existing business is someone who is already maybe a client, but they have new money coming for them. So think something maybe like an inheritance, or again, maybe they're a newer client for you and you're still moving those accounts over. Again, whatever you want to interpret with that one. But again, it's someone you've already worked with prior. I'm going to leave mine as new business. And one more choice you get from this page, permission type. Now, permissions, again, is a fancy way to say, who can see this opportunity? If I didn't want every single person in my database, I didn't need my coworkers to see this, I don't need my assistant at this, I literally only wanted myself to see this, that's where I could pick that user and come in here and find my name. Team, a little bit bigger. Team's allowing the ability to have multiple users see this opportunity. Now, if you leave it as the select one, that's just saying anyone who is a database user will have access to that opportunity. Now I'm going to leave it that way. I'm going to add that new opportunity. Again, give it a second to load. And then this is where you're going to get those different options. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I started with the more complex process first. Opportunities to me are incredibly straightforward because it's just a lot of plugging in that data. There's a few tools in here that are customizable, and I would encourage that because it'll help make it easier to use. But for the most part, do not overthink this. That's my biggest sentiment when it comes to opportunities. First thing you're going to see, though, besides the name, because it's going to push over from that first page, next steps. Next steps is a fancy way to say, what am I doing next? Am I calling that prospect? Am I sending paperwork? Am I verifying the accounts have been funded? In a way, this is almost like a deconstructed task. So one of the biggest feedbacks I get on occasion is, well, I'm a 1-2 person office. Workflows are too much for me. I want to know where we're at with this, but I don't want to go through hoops to get there. That's where opportunities to me really shine, because stage and next steps are in a way a deconstructed workflow. Stage is that step scenario. And I know it gets a little confusing here, so bear with me. Stage is that step scenario where it's saying where you're at in the process. Next steps are physically telling you what you're doing next. This is one of those customizable lists. By default, you have closed, lost, and closed won. I would encourage, in fact, this is the hill I'm going to die on for this conversation. Go add more stages if you're going to be using opportunities. You can put in however you'd prefer it. We did it by existing business and new business, but this really will help control where you're at with the process. Now, again, type is just going to come over from that first page, new and existing. Assign to, who's responsible for this? Is this something I'm taking care of? Source is that other customizable field. This should feel a little deja vu though, because this is the exact same source list that you have for adding on a contact. So when I add a contact and ask where they're coming from, this is that same source. So you can come in here and say, well, We actually networked it through them with a workshop. They were a referral. Again, it's just helping us keep into account where this is coming from. Now I'm going to circle back to close date in just a second. I'm going to go knock out the bottom four here. Amount is exactly how it sounds. How much are we talking about? Probability. This is the one time I will say you can put in a percentage and no one can call you out on it. But again, if the likelihood of you closing on it is high, that's where I'd put those 90s, 100%. If we're, kind of treading through some murky waters, we're not sure, that's where you can have a lower probability on here. Projected revenue, again, exactly how it sounds, how much you expected to earn. And actual revenue, you won't fill in until you're much, much further in the process where you can actually fill in what you are actually going to make. Now, close date. The reason I circle back to this is because I've seen this interpreted two ways, and to me, neither of them are wrong. Close date to me has always been associated with, well, when is this opportunity going to wrap up by? Think of that as kind of like an estimated completion date. I have seen recently, though, some offices treat this close date as the due date for that next step. So if one of my next steps is to do a follow-up phone call, well, when do I want to do that follow-up phone call? I can come in here and say, okay, on Tuesday. So either or to me is fine if you want to interpret it as the due date for the next step or the overall due date of the actual work, or I'm sorry, of the actual opportunity. That's also perfectly fine. The one thing I will stress, whatever you decide on, make sure everyone in the office is going to use this tool is on the same page. Couple other things, linking contacts. Again, if you've got your prospect in here, by all means, come on over here, search for that name, link that contact, we'll have them linked up over here. If there's a workflow or again, that process we want to go through, maybe we don't want this kind of too loose structure. We want that kind of black and white, here's what we do. Come on over, link that workflow, you got it, can go ahead and go from there. Keeps you again accountable. If you decide after the fact, you know what, no, everyone shouldn't be seeing this this opportunity, you can submit those permissions. Keep in mind though, permissions are a admin and database owner function. So not everyone will see this. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean Redtail's broken. Permissions are limited to that admin and that database owner. Coming a little further down, you've got a couple more things towards the bottom. Opportunity timeline. That's your tattletale. Who did what, when, where? That's where this is coming in here saying, hey, you added this opportunity today at 11:32 a.m. Again, as I add more details in here, it'll keep those little timestamps as we go. One massive situation here that I want to definitely cover. Notes. This is probably the biggest confusion I see with opportunities. If you come down here and you click that 0, it does bring you to the notes section for this opportunity. I'm going to stress that. It is the note section for this opportunity. I often get the question, hey, I added in a note for this opportunity, but it's not showing up on the contact record. It's not going to. The notes for this live for this opportunity. So it's everything I've done or everything I need to keep track of for compliance purposes for this opportunity. One workaround or one little tip I'd give, when you add this note, if you want this note to show up in the opportunity section and on the contact's main contact page, add them as an additional link contact right down here. If I add them in here, then that's where it'll go ahead. It'll save it in this section and it'll also save it as a regular note on that contact's record. So again, that's just one thing. Again, I don't want anyone to go in here and go, where's all my stuff and panic and freak out. I don't want that. I just wanted to clarify that, but that's the only thing that's, again, just a little bit tricky that we may not be aware of. But everything else in here, again, do not overthink. If you think it's what it means, it's exactly what it means. Approach that in there and save that opportunity. But again, opportunities themselves are to help you keep track of where you're at with the process. So when you come on over to opportunities again on the left, anything I have in here is supposed to be that quick glance. Hey, we're on the data gathering. We're on the sign and confirm. Looks like we're approaching this where it's the overall due date and we're behind on these things. When you are past that close date, it will turn that bright red. So it helps kind of flash that. But the last thing I'm going to stress with opportunities is that ultimately they should end. You should have a completion with it. When you are in fact done with them, and I'm going to come back in here, you click back on that opportunity, that's where you would come in here and change it to that closed lost or closed won. So I'm just going to put it in here, close loss really quick, save that opportunity. What will end up happening? It's going to disappear from this one because it's no longer considered active. It will show up under the close tab at that point. Now, again, if it is attached to a contact record, it will show up also within their contact records opportunity section. So it doesn't ultimately disappear. You'll find it here. You can find it on the contact record if it's attached. You could still find it under reports for the opportunities report. There are multiple places, but ultimately you just do not want to have a bunch of active opportunities from 2016, from 2017. Again, you want to make sure you are staying on top of those. Now, the last thing, I think I just said last thing. So my true last thing I will stress with opportunities, one little hidden gem that I just personally like to use just to help, again, me visually control everything I've got going on in my world. On the Today page, almost towards the middle of the screen, you're going to see that Opportunities tab at the top. I personally like to look here just because this is going to show me any upcoming opportunity that I have in 30, 60, 90 days. This is where it can help me really stay on top of things so I don't let things keep building. That's, again, just a personal preference. But if you like having that, you like having it where it's like, okay, this is what I need to see, is a short little view of it. I'd recommend just going from that Today page and looking at that Opportunities tab. All right, so with that said, we have covered several different processes, depending again on really sometimes our preference, sometimes the size of our office. Both of these are the tools that would, again, be geared more towards that prospecting scenario. We're certainly not limited to these, but these are the two big items that you'd want to consider when it comes to that prospecting.
Thanks so much for joining us today for this particular session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call at 800-206-5030, option 3 for support, or just shoot us an email over to support@redtailtechnology.com. Thanks a lot and have a great day.